Welcome back to my channel. My name's Danielle and I'm the owner of Damn Fancy Creations and the Drunk Flamingo Glitter. If you guys are watching this video, that means you're in my Damn Fancy tribe, and I just wanted to say thank you to those of you that are in my tribe. I am so appreciative of you guys that join and stay month after month and trust me to teach you guys how to make awesome cups. In this tutorial today, we're going to be covering everything you see listed here. I absolutely love how this tumbler turned out, and I am so excited to share this guy with you. If y'all have any questions about products that I use or techniques that maybe you need clarification on, please ask in the Damn Fancy tribe, and I will come back and answer your questions or clarify anything you need. For now, we're going to go ahead and get started on this tutorial, and I hope you guys enjoy. Alright guys, so first things first, I popped off this little cover so we can do our fun glitter butt. I just like to use a metal putty knife, jam it down in there with my hammer, and pop off the lid. It's super easy. Now we're going to get started on the clay part of our tumbler. I have this pasta maker. This is what I use to roll out my clay. I just roll it pretty thin, especially if I'm going to be covering my entire tumbler on it, because I don't want it to be super heavy. I am just going to smooth out my sheet of clay. This is polymer clay. I like to use Sculpey Premo or Craftsmart brand by Michaels. Surprisingly, they're very comparable in flexibility. I also have Sculpey 3, which is a little bit more softer to work with, but not quite as durable as Premo. But since this is going to be covered in epoxy, you can kind of get away with using Sculpey 3 versus Premo. I personally find Sculpey 3 and the Michaels Craftsmart brand easier to work with because it is softer. Premo can be a little tough, and it does need a lot of conditioning before you're actually able to kind of sculpt it into the shape that you want. So I am just patting down this sheet of clay and trying to kind of work the air bubbles out as I go. And since this is going to be a pumpkin, I'm not super concerned with getting it really smooth and flat because pumpkins do have texture. We're also going to go in and add some more texture with our silicone tools. So I am just kind of flattening everything down with my fingers, trying to hide those seams the best I can. And then I'm just kind of rolling it between my hands just to smooth out the texture just a little bit. And then I'm cutting the clay off around the tops and bottom rims. And I have a clay tool set that I've had for years. You can get several off Amazon or local craft stores. And I'm just using a little bit of water to kind of smooth out any parts that are really bumpy. And if you want to use gloves, you can definitely use gloves. This does help to prevent fingerprints. But again, since I knew we were going to be adding a lot of texture to this guy, I wasn't super concerned with it. But again, that's just personal preference. And these are the silicone tools I'm going to be using. I have a few different sizes. And we're just going to go down and make the little grooves that pumpkins have. I'm going to do a few deep ones all the way down the tumbler. And then I'm going to take my smaller tool and kind of define that a little bit more. And then we're just going to smooth out the edges with our fingers. So we're going to do this for every one of those deep grooved lines that we made. And next we're going to take a thinner silicone tool and just kind of make grooves all in these little sections. And we're just going to do this all over the tumbler. This will just help to kind of give the textured effect that pumpkins have. And we're just smoothing out any really rough or loose clay spots that we see. And you can see that I'm just kind of alternating between tools just to get whatever effect I'm trying to get. I had never done a pumpkin tumbler before, so I was kind of learning as I went. I think I decided to go back with the pink tool because it cut a little bit deeper. And I decided that I wanted my marks a little bit deeper, especially since this was going to be epoxied. I know that epoxy smooths everything out. And I wanted to make sure that those grooves were deep enough to still give that dimension that I wanted even after epoxy. So once you're happy with the grooves, we are going to cut out our little pumpkin face. So once you get the size you want, I just held my paper up to the clay and I used my little sharp clay tool and just dotted around the image. So I just am dotting around the eyes just to get the basic shape. We're doing the same thing with the nose. And I'm not really holding or applying too much pressure on here because I don't want to mess up the clay that's already on the cups. And then once we have all of the eyes, nose, and mouth kind of outlined with the dots, I'm going to go trace those dots, connect them, kind of like connect the dot. And then we're going to pull out that clay. And if you use a softer clay, it will be a little bit difficult to kind of dig that clay out of there. But we are going to clean that up in just a little bit. To make this easier, you can also pop your tumbler in the refrigerator for a little bit, or the freezer. That way the clay will get hard and you can just peel up the clay. But this worked out fine too. So I am just kind of smoothing out the edges right now with my silicone tools again. And I'm going to do the same thing for the mouth. So right now I'm just reshaping the teeth, or his lack of teeth, I should say. And while we're reshaping, I'm just using this silicone tool to kind of help blend any of those rough edges and smooth it out just a little bit with my fingers. And we're doing the same thing around the nose. We're just cleaning up those edges. And now I'm going to take a Q-tip and some alcohol, and we're just going to clean up the inside of his eyes and nose and mouth. And I'm just getting the tiniest bit of alcohol on here. You don't want alcohol dripping down your tumbler, just enough to kind of clean up the clay that's on the inside of the little cutouts. And then I will take a clean one and do the same thing, just to get the majority of the clay residue out of there. These are going to be painted black later, so it does not need to be perfect. So now that we have our pumpkin base finished, we're going to take some paintbrushes and we're going to apply some mica. So I'm going to use a few different colors. I have a light brown, a dark brown. This is Hot Chocolate and Cocoa Craze from CC DIY. And we're just going to take these colors and basically paint them in the grooves of our pumpkin. So this is really the first step. We're just going to apply this brown in the grooves with some fine paint brushes. And once we have that step complete, we're going to get out a couple more colors so that we can kind of paint the base of our pumpkin. So right now I'm just kind of brushing off all of the excess mica, kind of blending those browns together so there's not a whole lot of loose mica. So I decided to use a few different shades. This is a beige mica. This one is from Brambleberry. I am using an orange mica, also from Brambleberry. Brambleberry is a soap place, if you guys don't know. They don't have a whole lot of mica, but the mica that they do have is pretty cheap and it lasts forever. The light pink is from Woody's Goodies. And the rose gold that I'm using is also from Brambleberry. So I'm just going to blend these colors until I get the color that I was going for. I was really looking for kind of a light brown, orangey, rose gold color. And once we're happy with that, we're going to set it to the side. So we're going to make our succulents. I just pulled some greens and mixed my colors until I got the color that I was looking for. Again, I'm using Sculpey 3, Sculpey Premo, and Craftsmart brand. So for the first succulent, we're going to be making a few different sized balls. So the first one is going to be pretty small. This is going to be our center, and we're going to make it a kind of like a long teardrop, tapered on both ends, and we're going to press it flat in the center. And we're going to do the exact same thing to all of these pieces. So we are making a teardrop shape, but it's going to be tapered on both ends and kind of fat in the center. And then we're going to press down in the center to make that succulent leaf shape. So I'm going to speed this part up a little bit. If you guys need to see me do this a couple more times slowly, you can slow the video down or rewatch the first few leaves that I did. But just for time's sake, and once we get all of our little leaves made, we're going to go in with some mica again, and we're just going to color the tips of the leaves. I just picked colors that would go with the color theme of my pumpkin. So we're going to use a mixture of pinks, purples, oranges, and reds when we're coloring our leaves. So for this one, we're just going to be lightly dusting the mica onto the tips of the leaves. That way when we bake everything in the oven, the color will kind of bake in to the clay. You will still have to seal it, but it's not going to be coming off on your hands after you take it out of the oven. So now that we have all of our leaves painted, we're going to put them all together. So we are going to start with our smallest leaves and kind of twist them or press them together. In the shape of a succulent. I have a succulent plant that looks like this one outside on my patio, and it is my favorite plant that I have. It's getting so big too. I'm so proud that I have not killed it yet. And succulents are a lot harder to keep alive than people make you believe. So again, we're just kind of fitting these leaves into where we think they should go. And we're just kind of pressing the bottom together. Once we get all of our leaves on there, we can kind of spread out the clay and really kind of manipulate those leaves to get them to look how we want. So this one is going to be used for our topper, and of course we need a flat bottom. So I am just really carefully cutting off that big chunk of clay at the bottom. I'm putting a little bit of cornstarch on my hands so they don't stick to the leaves, and we're just going to kind of make it sit straight, manipulate those leaves to get them how you want them to look. And then we're going to set this one to the side until we're ready to bake all of our little succulents. So here is the next one we're going to do. So what we're basically doing for this one is just rolling out some round rectangles, almost like jelly beans. And we're just kind of fitting them together. And I don't want these to look too mechanical, so I'm trying not to make them in a perfect circle or a perfect square. I'm just trying to fit them in to where the shape looks a little organic. So once we have the shape that we're looking for, so it's kind of round, but the edges aren't perfect, we're going to go in with our mica again and just add some color on it. For this one, I'm using a light pink, a kind of a burnt red, and then some orange. And if you guys need help with colors, you can always look up what real succulents look like and make your colors based off of those images. And I do want to show you guys that they also have succulent molds in case you don't feel super comfortable actually forming them by hand. So I wanted to show you guys what the molds looked like for succulents. I personally prefer to form everything by hand, but in case you guys don't feel confident, these are what they look like. There's not quite as much detail and they are definitely more flat, but this is also an option. And we can also go in and add some color with mica just to help define some of these leaves a little more. So they still look cute, and these are still an option in case you guys want just something a little bit quicker than making all of these succulents by hand. So now that we have a few succulents made, we're going to put everything together. The first succulent I'm going to put on our tumbler is going to be string of pearls. And I make the string by using this little clay extruder. They have different little discs that you can put in there. One of them is little tiny circles, which is really good for making really skinny lines of clay. So we're just going to put a little bit of clay in our extruder. I did get this off of Amazon. And we're just going to twist all the clay out. And these are going to be the vines for our string of pearl succulents. So we're just going to carefully kind of separate this clay, and we're going to carefully press the clay onto the tumbler. Since this tumbler has not been baked yet, it is a little difficult to kind of get that clay to stick to the clay that has mica on it. So you do have to kind of work it a little bit. So I'm just kind of applying these little vines in random places. And I'm just kind of pressing it onto the tumbler to help to get it stick on there. So now that we have our vines on there, we're going to make some little circles. That is going to be the pearl part of our string of pearls. So I'm just going to make a whole bunch of little round green balls. And then we're just going to apply them to the tumbler one by one. And once we have a good bit made, we're just going to start sticking them on. Same thing, we're just lightly pressing them onto the tumbler to get them to stick. And already I thought he was turning out so cute. I could not wait to get the succulents on him. So now I was going to kind of start deciding where I wanted my succulents, and I'm going to be using liquid clay to help stick my succulents onto my tumbler. Liquid clay is kind of like a glue for clay. It's basically liquid polymer clay. And when it bakes, it's just as strong as regular clay. I am going to make a few of these little baby succulents from my mold. And I am just taking my silicone tool and I'm defining these leaves a little more so that there's a little bit more definition than the silicone mold actually gives. And then I am going to go and paint on some mica. So I'm kind of placing them on there to see where I am wanting these little succulents to go. And then I'm just going to place a little dot of this liquid clay, put my first little succulent on there, and then we're going to do the same thing for our second succulent. And we're going to let this dry for a little bit. So I decided to try to make a flatter version of my first succulent that I made. So what I'm doing is pretty much making the same shape that we did with our first succulent, but we're making the leaves shorter. It's just a teardrop shape and that's it. I wanted to try to make a flat succulent that had a little bit more definition than the succulent we got from the mold gives, if that makes sense. So we're just making teardrops. We're making different sizes. The bottom ones are going to be larger, and then they're going to get smaller the more inward you go. So once I have that teardrop shape, I am just pressing it onto our little succulent base. And that is one thing that I love about clay, is that you can easily go in and manipulate the shape of whatever you're working with. So you can bend the leaves, make them a little bit more curved, just to give it a more organic shape. So for the smaller leaves, I wanted a little bit more definition to the edges. So I just used a little paintbrush end to kind of roll and give it that defined shape that I would not be able to get with my fingers since this leaf was so small. So we're just pressing them down. So right now, you guys can see I'm just going in with the end of this little brush, and I'm just kind of defining some of those edges. And I think this is my last little baby leaf. And then I just kind of pressed them down in the center to kind of blend those little leaves together so it didn't look strange just having like leaves there. And sorry, my head's in the way. So I think this was like the perfect size. I did add one more extra leaf underneath all of the other ones. I should have started with like 5, but I did not. So we're just adding one more. I was worried that it would be too big. But I think the size was pretty good. And then I just flipped the succulent over and kind of blended the seam together so it would be a little bit more flat, which I will show you guys in just a second. So I'm just going to take my silicone tool and kind of blend that clay together so it holds while baking. And now this one is complete. I made another little jelly bean succulent. I don't know the names of the individual succulents. So now we're just going to go and brush on some mica again. And once we have these two colored, we're going to attach them to our tumbler. So we are going to put liquid clay again. And I did kind of plan out where these were going to go, just like I did the first ones. And we're going to let these set up for a little bit. And now I am going to cut some little strips. These are going to be our snake plant succulent leaves. So I just flattened out some green clay and I'm just forming them into kind of a triangle shape. And we're just going to fit those on the tumbler in whatever kind of shape you want them to be. So I curved some of them. Some of them were more straight. And again, I am blending that clay just to kind of disguise that seam a little bit. And once you're happy with your succulent placement, we are going to throw all of this in the oven. I like to bake all of my creations for an hour at 270 degrees. The package recommends 275 degrees for about 15 minutes, but the longer you bake your clay, the longer the plastic polymers have time to kind of form that strong bond that you need. The only way that you can burn your clay is if your oven spikes really high, and the temperature goes above like 300, 350 for a longer period of time. That's why I always suggest getting an internal thermometer that you can read and actually know what the temperature is of your oven versus just the digital reader on the outside of your oven. So once we have our little tumbler baked. He is super cute. I'm going to detail the snake plant leaves. I'm just mixing some yellow, green, and white paint. And I'm just going to get a small paintbrush. We're going to mix everything up until we kind of get a light yellow green. I did put a little bit of brown in there just to kind of dull the color a little bit. I didn't want it neon. And at first I'm going to go and outline my leaves. And I just kind of looked at my snake plant that I have here to see what the design on it was and how I could kind of best achieve that look. And if you look at a snake plant, the lines on it are not super straight. They're very organic. So next what I did was just kind of dot some paint right across the leaves. And then I took my silicone tool and kind of drug that paint down. And then drug some the opposite direction, just to get that pattern that we see on our snake plants. And then I did the same thing to the other leaves. So I'm going to come to the next leaves and we're going to do the same thing. I am just going to speed this up a little bit, but I do like to let them play for those of you that like to watch me do things more than once, for those of you that are visual learners. So we're just painting the edges of the leaves. Then we're dotting some paint and then pulling it down with the silicone tool. And once this dries, we will be ready to epoxy. So for the eyes and nose of this tumbler, I just took a paint pen and colored in the eyes and nose. If you guys want to do a different color, you could do glitter or something like that, but I just thought black went really well with him. So after that paint pen has dried, I am just taking a paintbrush and 1-to-1 ratio fast set, and I am literally just painting on the epoxy. And I am starting with the base of the tumbler. I'm making sure that I'm getting in all of those little cracks and crevices. This is the very first coat, so we're just making sure that everything is covered really well. And once I have the base of the tumbler covered with epoxy, we're going to go back and we're going to cover all of the succulents. Make sure to get all in those little cracks and crevices. Make sure that everything is covered, the back side of the leaves, in between all the little spots. This is why I like to use a paintbrush, because your fingers cannot get in all of these little crevices. Using a paintbrush also helps to kind of smooth the epoxy out. You can really get in there and get all of the excess epoxy out, so you don't have a big glob of epoxy in between any of your leaves. So I will just hold this. I will go around a couple different times, just making sure that everything is covered. And then I will pop this on my turner. I will hit it with my torch, and I will do this another 2 times just to make sure that everything has a great coat of epoxy on it and everything is nice and covered. So now for the topper. My video, again, cut out when I was filming. I was having major issues with my iPad this week, but basically I use car coasters for my topper bases. I found car coasters that worked with the lids that I used most often. I just measure them, make sure they're going to fit, and I pour a coaster mold. Then I will attach my baked succulents to the lid. I also found some little white rocks that I had that I thought was cute, that maybe you would find in a succulent garden. And once everything is attached to the lid, you can either use glue or epoxy if you want to. We are going to go in and cover everything with epoxy again. Now, polymer clay does not have to be epoxy. It is going to be durable on its own as is, but since my tumbler was coated in epoxy, I wanted the finish on the topper to match the finish that was on the tumbler itself. So that way our tumbler was nice and shiny and our topper was nice and shiny. I also think epoxy just gives an extra layer of durability. It's going to make sure that the succulents on the car coasters are attached really well. Yeah, and I just like the look of it. So we're just going in with the epoxy and the paintbrush again. I'm not globbing it on there. We're just doing thin layers. I believe I did 2 layers of epoxy on my topper just to make sure that everything was sealed in nicely. And then once your topper is cured, we will be ready to apply the magnets to the topper and to the top of our tumbler lid to make everything detachable. So now that our tumbler and our topper are dried, we're going to attach the topper to the lid with magnets so that it is removable. If you guys did not know, I was the first one to make removable toppers, so this is just how I've always done them. I also like to try different products to let you guys know what works or what doesn't use, and I will tell you right now that the Gorilla Super Glue does not work. But what you're going to do is you're going to stack 2 magnets. So there are 2 magnets right here. And we're going to attach one side of the stacked magnets to the tumbler topper itself. Now, I will say that the Gorilla Super Glue worked really well holding the magnets to the epoxy side, but for some reason, the magnets did not stick to the plastic tumbler. I'm sure there's a scientific reason, but I don't know what it is. But basically, you're going to apply your glue to the second magnet that is stacked. So we have 1 magnet on the bottom, 1 magnet on top. And we're going to let the lid sit on top of these magnets until it is dried. So that when the glue is dried and you remove the topper, 2 magnets are going to be stuck to the lid, and 2 magnets are going to be stuck to the topper itself, making it removable. And the very last thing we have to do for this tumbler is the bottom. We popped it off, so now we have to make it pretty. I just mixed a bunch of colors together. I ended up loving this glitter color so much that I made one for our August flock box. If you're looking for the color that is similar to this, it's in the box. It's called Harvest Moon. It's a really pretty mix of kind of rose golds, dark greens, and champagnes. So we're just going to fill this cavity with the glittered epoxy. We're going to get our torch, pop all the bubbles, and when that cures, we're going to coat it in a clear layer of epoxy so we get that nice shiny finish. Alright guys, that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I absolutely love how he turned out. If you guys have any questions, just ask me in the group. And if you make your own little pumpkin version, please post him because I love to see what you guys come up with. If y'all enjoyed this tutorial, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Don't forget to catch the next video coming up that was picked just for you. As always, if you're looking for more tips, tricks, or tutorials, be sure to check out my tutorial group on Facebook or our Drunk Flamingo glitter group. Thanks for watching.